Hey, welcome everybody to another Starfinder Wednesday, because it is Wednesday. It is 4 p.m. Pacific, and it's time for Starfinder Wednesday. Today we've got an awesome show. I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. We're starting to get into some of the classes and core races from the iconics and all that kind of stuff. And so today we are talking Kasatha and we're talking Solarian. And so to do that, we needed the one and the only Owen Stevens. How are you, buddy?
I'm good.
Welcome back to another one.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always good. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. So today, Owen, we're going to be talking about the Kasatha.
Yep.
We're going to be talking about their history and all of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We also, as you were just saying before we started the show, how interwoven that is with Solarian.
Absolutely.
And so it just seemed to make sense. Normally, I was thinking in my head, I was like, let's do the ancestry separate from classes, and each one can be its own show. And you were like, this is so woven.
For this case, yeah, I think it's worth tackling them as a united subject.
Yeah. So,
and then if people really dig it, right, we can go deeper into one or the other in another show later. But
and that's the beauty of it, is because we always have more shows.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, folks, these shows are staying.
we hope you like it. But
whatever. Hillary, welcome. It's good to see you. Guess what I have in my hot little hand right here? I got some of your questions, so I'm excited to do that. So you could just sit back and not even worry about typing in your questions, because you've already done it. You get to save time by working smarter, not harder, I guess is what we're saying.
Well, also that means I got to look at those on the message boards, the Paizo.com message boards, and have some idea how I was going to answer them.
Yeah, and just for anybody else, Hillary started a really awesome. Actually, Zoe started a message board, or a thread on the message boards. This is the Starfinder General Discussion, where I'm putting up, as soon as I can, I'm putting up what the shows are going to be beforehand. So if you're watching this in VOD or anything like that and can't be here live, jump on that message board and. I have to watch. I don't take a fax. I don't have fax machine, so I can't do that.
No, we can't fax from here.
No, we can't.
Here being 2018.
Oh, that is true. Yes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put a link in the description. And I'm reminding myself right now, for future Dan, make sure you put a link in the description to that message board, so that you can ask the questions beforehand. And I think, Hillary, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I said 2 p.m. the day of the show is the latest that you can put a question there, just because I need some time to prepare everything.
Sure.
So let's say 2 p.m. day of show. If it's after that, I may not get to it. Sorry. But we'll go with that. So yeah, hit that link or go to the message boards for that. All of that's out of the way.
Yeah.
Finally, did you have a good Thanksgiving?
I did. I had a great Thanksgiving.
Nice. Did you enjoy the time off more, or did you enjoy the Thanksgiving more?
I enjoyed the time off more, if I'm being fully honest. I mean, it was a 4-day weekend.
Yeah, nice?
And I've been having 1-day weekends to get some of these projects put forward recently. So
yeah.
The extra time off was nice.
I really enjoyed the time off. It was very nice. So let's see, Kasatha
And Solarians.
Yes, let's talk about this. Where do we begin with the Kasatha? I keep my th word keeps getting in the wrong spot there.
So with the Kasatha, you start on Kasath. Kasath being the homeworld of the Kasatha,
right.
Which is largely so blasted and hot and desert driven that it can't sustain life. It has not quite gone totally lifeless yet, but it is mostly lifeless.
Okay.
And as a result, shortly after the gap ended, a group of space traveling sort of sages known as the Witchweirds, which are the race that, for instance, appear to have seeded the Shobad on Akaton. They showed up on Kasath, and they told the Kasathans, you all need to build a ship, and you need to travel to the solar system, and you need to colonize this planet, Akaton.
Okay, and the solar system we're talking about would be the Pact.
Although no one was calling it that at the time.
Yes, the Pact Worlds.
Right.
Okay.
Would be the Pact Worlds.
Okay.
And this was right after the end of the gap, so they did not have drift technology at that point. So they built a giant world ship, the Adari, that has a population, probably a top population around 50 or 60,000. Maybe it's a little over 40,000 in the current time frame.
Okay.
And this giant ship took several centuries to fly to what is the Pact Worlds to show up and colonize Akaton, and they arrived like less than a century ago, right? Like 50 or 60 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
During the Silent War, the Cold War between the Veskarium and the Pact, and they orbited over Akaton, and Plan A was, let's invade. But they didn't expect there to be a thriving technological society when they arrived there. For whatever reason, when the Witchweirds told them to go, they were under the impression, when we show up, this is going to be a planet we can easily colonize. It won't have a lot of people, a lot of advanced cities and weapons and fleets, etc. So they had to make a decision pretty quickly. And we know from the history books that there was some pretty hefty negotiation involved. I presume that the stewards of the Pact Worlds were heavily responsible in that. And the Kasatha decided, we're not going to invade Akaton. We're not going to try and colonize it. This world ship has centuries of utility left in it. We're going to put ourselves in orbit. And we're just going to become citizens of the solar system.
Okay. And by citizens of the solar system, we're looking at them staying on the Adari.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they migrate off.
Right.
But
right.
The Adari is effectively the homeworld of the Kasatha at this point.
Okay. And I'm showing some images right now that you sent ahead to me
Yeah.
earlier. And this is this isn't just a ship. This is massive.
This is it's a city. It's actually
Yeah.
a series of small cities. It's several miles long. And the interior is sort of cunningly laid out. If you've ever been to an amusement park and you know how it feels bigger than it is because they carefully make sure that the walls and the perspective are all set up, that's the way the Adari is set up. So that they have multiple, if we're being realistic, small settlements, but they are treated like cities, and each one has the sort of accommodations you would expect in a city, as well as having some wilderness areas and even places where they have preserved and nature preserves dangerous creatures from Kasath. That is an area you can't go to safely without a guide. But all of this is in the interior of this ship.
Okay.
And the population is mostly Kasathan. There are a few Ysoki, there are a few androids, and then a smattering of other races because other people are allowed to move there. But this is a very Kasathan group. And they have brought their culture with them. And this is a very, very different culture from anything in the Pact Worlds. Because it's literally totally alien to the whole solar system, right? In the Pact Worlds, we know that, elves were moving between planets, and early on, way before the gap, people were using magic to go from planet to planet, and they could scry on each other. So there was some cultural overlap within the Pact Worlds from planet to planet. But the Kasathans are from a totally different solar system, and therefore a totally different background. And one of the things they brought with them was the philosophy of the cycle, which is a religious-like belief in the spiritual value of being aware that everything is a cycle, that it starts, it comes full circle, and then it ends. Specifically, that ties to the cycles of planets and solar systems and suns. And the cycle is the philosophy that drives Solarians. So Solarians did not exist in the Pact World prior to the arrival of the Kasatha, and that's why there's no suggestion of Solarians anywhere in Pathfinder, for example. They literally weren't there. I mean, just like one wizard could have teleported to a different solar system, potentially one Solarian could have showed up somewhere. I'm not saying but there was no tradition of them, no training of them, and that is what brought that group, which we represent in a character class, that set of traditions, into the Pact Worlds. And there's one monastery for training them on the Adari. There's one monastery for training them on the sun, which grew up after then because Solarian's connected to the sun. So since we have cities on the sun, there's a monastery there. And there's one on Absalom Station, which again was set up by a Kasathan.
Right.
So that is the big link between that class and that race. And that's one of the reasons why when you look at the Starfinder classes, it's not hard to say, okay, well, soldiers clearly evolved from the tradition of fighters from Pathfinder. And it's not hard to see that operatives evolved from the soldier of rogues and investigators and some of those other things. But there's not a strong thing that you say, well, that clearly evolved into Solarians. That's because it's literally an alien concept and tradition that has been dropped into the solar system.
Okay. So then, because it comes from the Kasathan, Kasathan culture, I guess we could say.
Yes.
As far as the Solarian goes, would this outreach to have other ancestries become a Solarian, is that purely from the Kasathan ancestry, or are there other forces pushing that? I don't want to say agenda is not the right word.
No, I mean, the cycle is a philosophy that exists sort of throughout the galaxy in general, right? So, like, we're not saying that there might not have been Solarians in the Veskarium, for example. That tradition may have existed there independently. But the people that brought it to the Pact Worlds were the Kasathan, and that happened a couple of generations ago. So all of the Solarian influence in the Pact Worlds, it is most strongly from the Kasathans, but a lot of other people have taken it up now.
Okay.
So it's like, the cycle is the sort of thing that if you have any interest in philosophy, you might study it lightly, right? You might be someone who's moved by it but doesn't become a Solarian. And the fact that it is a source of power means that there are going to be people investigating it and wanting to study it. And it's a totally different tradition that means anyone who's worried about, hey, how do you summon a mode of energy that turns into a big energy weapon that you can swing around, that's going to get people's attention.
Right.
So there are numerous, there are human Solarians and Yusoki Solarians and android Solarians, but more Solarians are probably Kasathans than any other one group, but there aren't as many Kasathans as there are other races in the Pact Worlds, right? Their home world is 43,000 or so people as opposed to millions. So even if there's a tiny percentage of humans that become Solarians, that could be a large percentage of the total number of Solarians.
Right.
And just like there are wizards and magic and psychic powers throughout the galaxy, there are Solarians throughout the galaxy which may well have originated in places that were totally separate from Kasath. That just didn't happen in the Pact World. So it's a tradition that did not natively occur on Golarion or Akaton or Castrovale. None of those planets developed that philosophy.
I gotcha. Okay. So then now, and I'm going to take a question from, this is the first question we're taking from the message board.
So before we even get to the Q&A.
But this fits perfectly.
Okay.
Because we kind of glossed over it.
Yeah.
And
okay.
so I'm pretty sure you know which question I'm going to be talking about. But the Witch Weirds, and this is from Hillary on the message boards. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary.
When they led the Kasathans to Akaton and said, hey, you should do this thing. And then they get there and see that it's already inhabited and all that kind of stuff. They're also, and this is the direct wording, given that the Witch Weirds are also progenitors of the Shobat Odds and from Akaton, one would think that they already knew that Akaton was inhabited. What is their deal?
So there's this interesting thing that, and it's not something that we really discussed in any depth in Pathfinder, but there are a lot of two-armed, two-legged humanoids that are very, very similar in form, right? Elves and dwarves and Lashunta all look like variants on the same basic prototype. As it happens, there is another common multiracial format, which is the four-armed, two-legged humanoid, and that's your Shobads and your Witch Weirds and the Kasathans.
Right.
And the Witch Weirds are clearly involved in a greater culture with the four-armed humanoids somehow, right? We know that they're progenitors of the Shobad. We know that they directed the Kasathans here, so they already had contact with Kasath. But they're not talking about whatever that is. So we have joked in the Star Chamber about the four-armed conspiracy, right? that there is something that links these races and possibly other races that may not be discovered yet, or we just may not have discussed yet, right? There could be more four-armed races elsewhere throughout the Starfinder galaxy. So that is obviously a thread, and where that thread goes when you pull it is something that we haven't discussed at great length yet.
Okay, so it's interesting. There are lots of places that this could go.
Yeah, totally.
In the meantime, if it is actually solved, in the meantime, world's your oyster. If
Absolutely.
you're doing a homebrew,
right?
What do you think? I think, which is great. I've talked at length about Starfinder and the possibilities being endless. And
one of the nice things about having it set up over a whole galaxy is that you can create a whole planet.
Yeah.
And you will never run into we're telling you, if you're just on Golarion and you create a continent, we could later do a map that shows that there's no continent there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we're never going to map an entire galaxy. That's just not, it's 100,000 light years across. We'll never get to all of it. So you can say, hey, there's a planet in the vast, and great, there's a planet in the vast. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and people are already saying this. This is going to be a hashtag eventually, but go four-armed conspiracy.
Yeah, four-armed conspiracy.
100% behind
Absolutely.
This idea. If you at home end up homebrewing something with a four-armed conspiracy, I want to know about it. Sounds awesome. So let's get into some of the technology of the Kasathan. There are weapon crystals.
Solarian weapon crystals.
Yes.
Yeah. So Solarians have the ability to create this solar weapon, or at least some of them do. It's one of the things you can do.
Right.
But the solar weapon, it does not natively have weapon fusions, which is how you put magic onto a weapon. It doesn't have a lot of traits, and it does not keep up with the best possible damage of technology available to you at each levels. So there's Solarian weapon crystals, which draw on fundamental forces of the universe, the strong and weak nuclear forces, bosons and gluons and all that stuff, and augment your solar weapon. And because your solar weapon is falling behind, this is a way that you can tack that on, you can get an augmentation, and then you can take all those things like weapon fusions, and you can put them in your weapon crystal and modify your attacks that way. And that would, again, be something that people may have created independently in a lot of different places, but as far as the Pact Worlds goes, the Kasathans most likely the people that brought that technology to the Pact Worlds. And they've got huge manufacturing plants called crucibles on the Adari that are powered by the engines that they are not having to use to move the ship. The ship's in a stable orbit now. Okay. Yeah. Which create these things. So that would have been one of the ways they would have been able to create the early Solarian crystals, would be with these huge manufacturing crucibles. But again, as with nearly any technology, right, once it's out there, people will look at it and reverse engineer it. And,
yeah. Are they only used for weapons?
Yes. Okay. So there is also a thing called a Solarian armor, which augments the armor you're wearing. Game mechanically, however, a Solarian weapon does not augment an existing weapon, right? It's by itself. So in order to have that augmentation option, you have to have game mechanically Solarian weapon crystals. When it comes to armor, the Solarian thing is the augmentation, and you're overlaying that to armor that you can already augment and upgrade and make magical. Okay. So the only thing you need is this Solarian energy, which just makes it slightly tougher.
Okay. All right. And then getting into getting into the idea that there are other types of other classes of Kasathan. I've got a couple here. Yeah. The one that my second favorite one. I'm going to go with the sniper. I think the sniper looks so awesome. All of the art is amazing.
It is. It's really amazing.
Looks great.
Sarah Robinson and the whole art crew did an amazing team, and the artists we worked with are fantastic.
Amazing. I remember when we first got to see the core rulebook when it first came out, and you're looking through it and you're just like, this is legit, this looks really good. And then all the art, like Remco and all the, like, everybody just came together. It's all amazing. So yeah, I love the art. But when it comes to Kasathans being other classes, how is that something that started when they got into what is now the Pact Worlds, or was that a thing that was already there?
So the rest of our classes sort of represent broad tropes and archetypes, right? Soldier's a very broad trope. Yeah. Even Technomancer, right, is just sort of if magic and technology both exist and they come to a certain point, the Technomancer is a logical extension. So their versions of those traditions existed already on Kasath and would have gone with them. But they specifically have Doyens. And a Doyen is a cultural expert in some aspect of Kasatha life or culture. And the Doyens form the Doyenate, which is a meritocracy that runs the Adari. So their government is run by the experts within all the fields that are considered important on the Adari. So if we have like environmental engineering, right, is very important on a sealed system. So there is a Doyen of environmental engineering, and that might well be a member of the mechanic class. Okay. Although, since when we're writing up NPCs, we're not limited to that. We could just say, hey, this is just an expert at technology, right? We don't have to say it's a mechanic, but they have that sort of background. So you would have mechanics coming from that, whether they are drone mechanics or cortex mechanics. And while those are supposed to be meritocracies, you also have sort of that legacy thing going on, where if your family has for 7 generations had the best engineers, then you have connections to the best engineering schools, and you have the best engineering manuals at home, and you can be taught engineering principles at a young age, so that the same families tend to end up generating the best environmental engineers and tend to generate the Doyen. And then once the Doyen of environmental engineering is a member of your family, they get to decide a lot of what happens regarding environmental engineering on that ship, so they can pass out, I mean, not necessarily with any malice, but just the people they know, the people they like, their family members, people they trust, are naturally going to have an advantage in, again, being good at that thing. Right. So for most, like, there might well be, and we haven't gone through all the Doyens, we probably won't ever, right? We want that flexibility, but there could well be a Doyen of, far distance combat. So your Kasathan sniper might well be related to or trained from or look up to a Doyen of sniping who's a military expert who's part of the Doyonate, this council that rules the Adari.
Okay. All right. So essentially, the basic idea was, no, they didn't necessarily have these classes, but they had their own version of. And for those of you at home, you're right, Hillary, that had Doyen on the pronunciation bingo card. Give yourself a marker. You got that right. It's
just because I say it doesn't mean it's right. Right? I'm not the creative director.
I don't know.
I'm the Starfinder.
I'm gonna say this
lead.
in this studio right now.
Okay.
Right now. You're the ranking official, and so
fair enough.
Doyen, go tell everybody right now. So yeah, there you go. Let's see. I want to get to the last one. I've been saving this one.
Okay.
I like this one a lot. This is actually, if you've ever gotten one of my business cards, this is my business card actually, and this is the Hell Knight.
Yep.
And I love the Hell Knight so much, because you don't notice it first. Like
it's got 4
way
arms.
they did this art.
Yes.
When you look at it at first, you don't notice it. But this is a Kasatha Hell Knight.
It's a Kasatha Hell Knight, Kasathan Hell Knight. And one of the things I love about this piece of art is that it shows integration of the Kasathans with the Pact Worlds, right? Because they did not have Hell Knights on Kasath.
Yeah.
But just imagine, for example, if a big city block in New York ended up moving to another solar system. Mm-hmm. And so you had all of these New Yorker traditions, but some of those people would want to learn about the Pact, the new solar system, move around, and would be drawn to those organizations. So what this piece of art tells us is, hey, some Kasathan said, oh, there are Hell Knights who just worship order and are drawing from the traditions of hell, which is so ordered that all of the paladins and forces of good in the universe can't destroy it, is the ultimate lockdown of doing things in an efficient, rigid manner. That appeals to me. I will go become a Hell Knight.
Yeah.
And so just with that one piece of art, there's a whole backstory that you learn about how they're integrating into the society. And it's Hell Knight armor, so that they've been around long enough for that sort of custom thing to occur. But like you, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's a cool Hell Knight.
Yeah.
Oh, what are those things coming off their legs? Oh, swords. Those are 2 more arms with swords.
Yes. And when I first looked at it, I recognized they were swords. But I was like, oh, they're like in the scabbard or whatever. And then you keep looking, you're like, no, those are in the ready position right now.
Those are they're prepped to go.
That is it's amazing. So
and culturally, you have to assume that Kasathans are driven from a different way of thinking, in part just because they've got 4 arms, right? Like we use the phrase "on the other hand." That wouldn't be a Kasathan phrase, because they don't generally have it assumes that you're doing something, and then it says on the other hand, this one other thing.
Right.
And that ties in a little bit to,
unless they have 3 other things they're going to say.
Right, but then you can start thinking, right, what would they say instead, right? They might say, taking a different grip might be a different phrase they would have, because they've got a whole, like someone might say, try a different tack. A Kasathan might tell you, let's try a different grip on this.
Right.
We've got a lot of options. There are a lot of ways we can do this.
Right.
So they're very strongly tied to tradition, but not a single tradition, a personal tradition. That Kasathan culture encourages you to develop your traditions. And so when new people come to the Adari, frequently they're really confused about the fact that, they're told this is traditional. Oh, who does this? Well, just this one guy. Well, if it's just this one guy, why is it traditional, right? Like, what is a traditional dinner to you all? Well, he only eats white food, right? Because that's his tradition. Where did that come from? He likes the color white. That's it. And so frequently you have to have a local cultural guide, because that's not the way anyone else in the Pact Worlds thinks.
Right.
At the same time, if you come along and you're like, well, I'm going to adopt all of this person's traditions because they make sense to me, then a Kasathan will say, well, your personal tradition is to match his personal tradition. So even though that's not the way we do it, the whole point is to do it the way you do it. So by doing this thing we don't do, you have at the same time become what you're trying to become.
Right.
Your tradition is different from ours by being the same as ours.
Okay, so what are we missing here? What haven't we covered with the Kasatha? I've gone through all of the images. I'm not, I wish I had more. Yeah. Because as you're saying things, I'm like, oh, I wish I grabbed a photo of that. I wish I grabbed one of those. There's
a limit to how many things we can cram in, right?
Yeah.
They're one of my favorite races because there's some core questions about what comes next with them, right?
Yeah.
So they showed up in order to colonize a planet and didn't.
Which was very sweet for them to be like, yeah, no.
Well, is it sweet, right? Because, I mean, the argument is that it's better to live in peace than to start a war when people will let individuals migrate anyway. But that does mean that there's not currently an active Kasathan homeworld. So the Adari has probably centuries of use left on it, but can it last forever? And if not, is Kasathan culture ultimately doomed? If they don't... So one of the things we talk about is that the current captain of the Adari, right, does not have nearly as much to do as the previous captains when the ship was moving. That used to be one of the most important positions.
Right.
And now it's not just a figurehead, right? Because you're still running the crew, you're still one of the people that gets to decide whether or not the ship's guns go off, etc. But it's more like being a mayor than being sort of the absolute lord that a captain on a moving important military vessel is. One of the things we note about the captain is that the captain's beginning to get wanderlust. And of course, one possibility is that the captain will give up being captain and go looking out there. But we also know that there are Kasathans that are looking for an appropriate world to colonize.
Yeah.
And if they find it, the question will become, are we going to do that with the Adari, which is what we built it for? The Adari could still power up its reaction thrusters and fly away.
Yeah.
Or someone could decide we are going to, over however long it takes, build a drive to take you through the drift on this thing, build a huge drift drive and get somewhere in a matter of weeks. Those are sort of some of the big cultural forces that may not even be decided for a generation or two or three, but it's sort of like their version of the big questions like global warming, right? This does not prevent us from doing anything today, but these are huge decisions that as a society, as a culture, we are looking at, and we don't all agree on how we're going to settle it.
Yeah. Wow. I never, and there are heavy implications behind all of that.
Absolutely.
Because now, even though they, came in within the last century, I think you said 60 years.
Yeah, something like that.
They are pretty integral into the pact worlds. Like, they are a part of this thing.
They are.
If they were just to leave, like the next day, gone.
Yeah.
That would have an impact.
I mean, and no one's sure how much of an impact it would have, right? They're here. The Adari is clearly one of the most powerful military mobile options. It may not be the most powerful warship because it wasn't built as a warship. Just the ability to defend itself, and it can move. The ability to have a mobile base of operations, right? If it goes someplace and powers up the crucibles, it can build manufacturing, maybe not to the scale of a planet, but certainly better than any big city because it's got these giant manufacturing plants. One of the interesting things about the Pact World that we don't talk about at any great length is that representation on the Pact Council is at least in part determined by population. And in just recent years, we say, the Adari has gotten accepted as a full Pact World. It is the only spaceship that is accepted as a Pact World. But its population is still only between 40 and 50,000 people.
Yeah.
So even if they get a vote, and even if occasionally they get to be on the High Security Council where there are only 5 people, so their one vote matters, the rest of the time, they're still going to feel very outvoted because there are millions of people on other worlds. Even Absalom Station has a huge population compared to the Adari. So that representative part of the government, they don't have as much of a say.
This is really interesting. You kind of almost forget that that they do have such small representation in the Pact world, and so I think it's really easy on one side when you really start to look at it that way to kind of write it off, because they do have such small presence there, and they're, like you said, their population determines their ability to sway in the Pact world and all of that sort of thing. But I feel like and maybe I'm wrong here, but with the right alliances and the right friends in high places and all of that sort of thing, they could start to change some of that possibly and have a little bit more sway. What is their relationship like with the rest of the natives Pact world? Is that the right term? Like ones that were originally incorporated in?
Arguably that is the right term.
Okay.
And that is something that I feel is still evolving, right? When you think about relationships today in the real world, even between countries, even between new countries, those always have centuries of backstory, right? How did this end up being our border? Why do we work with that people? Why do we or not share a language? The Adari's only been around for less than a century. So there isn't that deep root of communication, for good or ill. And even though we know that Kasathans are spreading throughout the Pact Worlds, there are still questions that, aren't settled. Are there undead Kasathans on Eox? Probably some. Don't know how many. Is that population growing faster than the population of the Kasathans? How fast is the Kasathan population growing? Are there more Kasathans living off the Adari than on the Adari?
Yeah.
And if not, when will that become the case? When will there be more Kasathans elsewhere? These are all things that are ripe for diving into, and it's the sort of thing that you can drive entire political intrigue games behind, right?
It's dominating my thoughts, right? Like, I cannot get this thought out of my head. Like, it just seems so intriguing, the political intrigue and all of that sort of thing. I like it. I like it a lot. Let's do this. Let's do some Q&A.
Let's do some Q&A.
Let me do a sign off, and we'll say goodbye to some folks, and then we'll talk to the folks in chat.
No one's actually going to leave.
No, well, the YouTube folks. The video's going to end.
Goodbye, YouTube folks.
Well, I got to do my sign off.
Okay.
Hang on a sec, because I also got to say like and subscribe and all that kind of crap. I have like a whole thing.
Let's hear it.
All right.
You are the Dodo of broadcasting.
That's going to do it for us, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time. Hope you learned a lot. I know I did. If you would like to participate in the Q&A that we're getting ready to start right now, then join us on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/officialpaizo. We have a new show every Wednesday, unless we've got a holiday or something, which we will a lot coming up, because it's the beginning of December just about. So,
Wednesdaymas.
Yes, it's gonna be something. So thank you so much. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like, or hit the subscribe button or the bell notification button, or say down in the chat in the comments what you plan to do with your homebrew of Starfinder involving Kasatha or Solarians, or any of the myriad of things that we learned just today alone from Owen K.C. Stevens, who was our guest. So, for Paizo, and for Owen K.C. Stevens, and for me, your old buddy Dan, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Bye!
Bye!